Hello and welcome back. My name is Steven and you're in Behind the Screens. This is episode 2. If you haven't seen episode 1 yet, you should go check that one out. It talks about a lot of the tools that are imperative as well as some optional tools that you will find along the way. This particular episode is all about format though, talking about the number of players, what's okay for the DM to do and not to do, talking about role playing as well as some common DM terms and definitions as well. The first thing that we want to talk about is the number of players in a campaign. The number of players in a campaign is vastly going to vary based on your experience as a DM. I have to assume, though, that you are here watching these videos because you are brand new to this universe of role-playing and you're really not sure what you want to do. You're not sure what to do, you're not sure what to say or how to go about things. So we're going to assume that you're brand new. And I'm going to say that you should not exceed 6 players. In fact, I would say that ideally you would have no more than 4 players and no fewer than 3. The reason for that is because campaigns can inherently be complex. They can be nuanced. They can have a bunch of different metagaming that goes into them. And especially if you have players that are much more experienced than you are as a DM, you have an opportunity to kind of let them down. If you have too few, then it's going to be kind of difficult to find twists and turns for the campaign to go in that makes sense for a party, especially if you're doing a precon like Rime of the Frost Maiden or Out of the Abyss or Descent into Avernus. A 2-person party is not enough to get through a lot of the campaigns. A single-person party I would recommend doing homebrew with because you can write your own story, you can be awfully forgiving and be forgiven for a lot of the infractions and a lot of things you're not sure about. Stick to 3 or 4, preferably 4, because then you can have a brute or somebody that is full of health and constitution and strength. You have a rogue or somebody that is stealthy and capable of doing the shady underworld deals. You want to have a healer or a support character, somebody that's going to be able to offer cure wounds or lay of hands, healing word, things like that, as well as being able to boost up your party and potentially do damage. And that person is usually a spellcaster, but there are ways around that too if you don't want to get into the spellcasting world. Beyond that, you also want to have somebody that's really good at doing damage. Maybe they don't have a whole lot of health, but they can jump into combat and do a lot of damage and get the heck out of dodge until they can be healed up or taken care of. Going beyond this also, going beyond that number of players also puts you at a disadvantage as a DM because inevitably they will split. The group will diverge. There will be some that want to take the left avenue and some that want to take the right avenue when they come to a fork in the road, whether it be a moral, a religious, an ethical, or even just a literal fork in the road. Then you have to keep track of 2 parties and maybe find a way to bring them back or dissolve the group altogether and potentially have them reroll characters if it comes down to a combat situation. Hopefully it doesn't. Again, we're not here to kill players, we're here to enable them to tell a great story. Too many players can definitely be cumbersome. They can do things that you don't expect. There's a lot of variables that are much more difficult to play off of, and there's a crumb of on-the-spot improvisation that a DM has to be able to do, and it's a learned skill. There are very few people out there that just inherently can improv like there's no tomorrow. So relax. Improv will come to you as you run into situations. I recommend following a bunch of channels on Instagram as well as YouTube to get a feel for some story and plot twists as well as some hooks. That'll give you an opportunity to kind of throw your mind into any different corner of whatever universe you want to create. It breeds a lot of ideas and it gives you the opportunity to be leveraging things so you don't have to just pull them out of thin air. Not enough players, however, can lead to a lot more work for you as well. A lot of DMs that I know, or a few of the DMs I know, rather, find that if the party is severely under-capable, let's say, of performing the tasks necessary to get through the campaign, the DM may take up the mantle and build 1 or 2 characters to fill in the blanks and not metagame, but offer an NPC that joins the party later to kind of brush away some of the more difficult things that 2 people would not normally be able to do. One-player games, however, are a little bit of a different special sauce in this entire universe. A one-on-one campaign, a DM and a player, offers a little bit of an intimacy there. And I'm talking purely about a relationship between the world and an individual. Think of solo video games or reading a novel about an individual that's out in the wilderness. Think like The Revenant or something along those lines. Maybe The Grey with Liam Neeson if you're into movies. These kinds of campaigns don't have to have a full party to play, but a full party can be incredibly, incredibly useful. That being said, NPCs can come to the rescue if you want. If you're looking to test and you don't want to waste a bunch of people's time, I don't think it's a waste of time whatsoever. If you don't want to show your chops in front of people just yet and you want to slow roll into being a DM, you can call up a friend and see if you can bounce a one-off campaign, just a single couple of hours in your basement or at your dining room table, and you just bounce some ideas off of them as a campaign grows. It could be a one-off, it could be a two-off, it could be 3 or 4 sessions. You could even turn it into a full thing if you want to. It all depends on how far into the lore that you as a DM want to delve into. One-off campaigns are great for testing your chops. They're also a great litmus test for where your players are going to take you, because it will never be where you want. It will never be where you expect. Even if you try to railroad them, they will sense the railroad and they will throw it into pure chaos. Trust me, it's happened to everybody. Next up, reading the room. This is one that takes a certain level of practice, one that doesn't usually get a lot of attention. Reading the room is incredibly important because it's going to set the precedent on role-playing. The standard of role-play. Are your characters going to role-play? Are they not going to role-play? That's for them to decide. Some of your players will absolutely be all in on the idea of role-playing. Others will be a little bit hesitant, thinking, I don't want to be that cringy. I don't want to get into a character. I want to just play the game. So it's going to be the difference between some people saying, I am Bjorg, an orc from the western side. I'm here to kill people and find who killed my family. Versus, so I'm a rogue and I want to sneak into the place, see if there's any gold there. Can I do that? And both are fine. It depends on really what the player wants as far as that goes. However, the DM has to paint pictures with words, has to offer an incredible experience for their players, and thus you have to make a decision and a communication with your players. Are you willing to go the distance for role-playing? Do you want to start out with the creepy crawlies, the witch and the hut in the woods with the boiling bogs and the moon glowing in the distance, just subtly draping a white glisten to all of the wet surfaces around? Or do you want to say that you enter the town and there's a bar to the left and there's a theater to the right? What do you want to do? When players get a feel for what you want out of the campaign, they're going to stretch themselves to fit that mold, usually. Some of them will be audacious enough to actually try to break that and set a precedent for the players themselves, but I would never leave it to a player to set the bar for what the expectation is for the campaign. Read the room and get a feel for what your players want. And don't feel like this needs to be implicit. Feel free to ask your players, what do you want out of this campaign? How do you feel about what's going to happen here? Is this something that you want to do, or do you want me to just be the DM and role play myself? Or what are you looking for out of this? And that will give them an incredible amount of comfort, knowing that they have a bit of control over how the game is going to operate. Not entirely, but they're going to have an opportunity to have a say in it early on. I recommend highly that regardless of what the players are looking for, I'm a high proponent of roleplay as the DM. What's the worst that could happen? Your players want to play this game. They want you to DM, or they've agreed to let you be their DM. You get to throw at them every accent, every weird, twisted thing you can think of to be an NPC. You can contort your face, or you can stretch it out and be a posh individual. You can slide rings onto your hands, or rip necklaces off of the scoundrels of the street. You have a choice. Have some fun with it. Bring out that inner theater nerd that you've got, that inner performance artist that you've always wanted to be. Or maybe you never did, and this is an opportunity for you to explore that avenue. Why not? The worst that can happen is the players say, that makes me a bit uncomfortable, in which case you just kind of backpedal a little bit and go from there. Next up on this whole reading the room thing is metagaming. What is metagaming? Metagaming is the act of talking about the game as players or a DM from outside of the roleplay. So if you have a party of players in a room talking to somebody that's supposed to start a quest, and only one person ends up paying attention to that person, say your paladin says, well, I now know this information. Can I just say that I've shared it with the group? Is that fine? Or do I really have to recite all of this? Make it easy for the players to be into the game. I would recommend not forcing them into repeating every word you've said. Offer to them the information, and then if they say, I'm going to share this with the rest of the group, or you can recommend it, then they can say, well, I'm going to share that. The whole table is going to hear it. If you wrote a note down and passed it to that person, they can pass it around if they so choose. But I recommend highly giving that power to the players, so to speak. Metagaming is something that happens often in Dungeons and Dragons because it's what enables people to talk about strategies. How do they want to build the party moving forward? How do they want to handle the progression of the story from a player's perspective? And metagaming is really an incredible tool, so long as it doesn't get out of hand and start turning into a way to cheese the campaign. Cheesing is not going to be fun for anybody, especially not for the DM, because the DM has to find a way to handle that. Fudging die rolls, though. We talked about this briefly in the last episode, didn't we? Should the DM fudge die rolls? All sources will say, no, you shouldn't. The Dungeon Master's Guide does say it is up to the DM. It is entirely up to the Dungeon Master whether or not they want to fudge the numbers. I would say, as a DM, I fudge the numbers roughly 40 to 50% of the time. Why? Why take the randomness out? Why remove the one thing that grounds us in this chaotic universe that we have? Because we don't want to kill people. And maybe you do. Maybe you want it to be more chaotic, more natural feeling. That's fine too. That is a choice that the DM makes. I would say, though, that if a player or the party is generally trying to do something over and over again and failing miserably every time, you can sort of fudge that DC check. And we'll talk about terminology here in a little bit. You can fudge those numbers a little bit in favor of the player, or if they've been trying to get really cheeky and they've been really rude, or they've been kind of screwing with the campaign a little bit, you can backpedal and kind of rig the game against them a little bit. It's the whole point of that DM screen, is to prevent people from seeing what your actual die rolls are, so they know nothing about whether or not you are making the game easier or harder. It also allows you to adjust stat blocks as necessary, because not every enemy is going to be conducive to a 3-person party. It's not always going to be conducive for a 6-person party. Sometimes you have to beef up the enemies, sometimes you have to nerf them. It's just the way the game plays. Finally, in this whole realm of soft skills, we're going to talk about critical success and critical failure. Critical success is essentially when you roll a d20 and the natural roll on it, just the way it falls, is on the highest value, 20. And a critical failure is the exact opposite, on the side of the 1. No modifiers, no adjustments, no nothing like that. It's all just what's on the die face. A critical success traditionally, or at least when I was getting into being a DM, was described as no matter how difficult the task, the player succeeds. No matter how easy the task, the player fails. And that's not the way that it goes. A critical success or a critical failure essentially means that when something happens, it happens big. If you fail big. If you succeed big. Sounds really straightforward and really basic, but that's the point. This is meant to be a basic talk through. If your players are trying to do something like knock down a wall that's quite sturdy, you want to make sure that it's a little bit difficult. So they may have to beat the DM's die roll of, say, 16 to break down that wall. They roll a natural 20, they barrel through that wall. Or the wall is too sturdy for them. The DM can absolutely make the decision. Do you want them breaking through that wall? Or do you want to railroad them a little bit towards another part of the story first? That's up to you. And we're going to talk about that terminology, that die roll called a DC or a die check here in a moment. Fudging the numbers is fine. When it comes to critical successes, critical failures, I tend to not fudge them very often. Usually if they happen, they kind of just happen and you handle them as they come along because that makes the most sense. That keeps that natural element continually growing because nothing feels better than a natural 20 and nothing feels worse than a natural 1. And the constant fear, that constant tension of whether I'm going to get a critical success or failure keeps me tantalized by throwing dice, if you will. So let's talk about some common terms that the DM should know to be able to pass along to the players or use during a campaign. The first one we just brought up. It is the DC, or the die check. Now, when you read DC, it's usually followed by a number, a whole number such as 10 or 11 or 15, somewhere between 1 and, you guessed it, 20. Why? Because it is the number plus modifiers that a player has to beat or a character has to beat in order to succeed at something they're trying to do. For instance, I want to look down or I want to look through a keyhole into a room and see if there's an enemy in there. I squat down and I look through that keyhole right in front of me and I say to the DM, I'd like to know if there's something in that room. Can I see anything? And the DM, in their infinite wisdom, says, give me a perception check. And in the DM's mind, the DM wants to be throwing around, what is the likelihood that somebody would be able to see anything through a keyhole into this room? Is it a dark room? Is it well lit? Is it dimly lit? What kind of vision do my characters have? Do they have dark vision? Do they not have dark vision? If they have dark vision and the room is dark, they're going to be able to see mostly uninhibited. But if they roll a DC check, even with dark vision, they might miss the keyhole with their eye. And a DC of 2 versus the DM's roll or DM's number of, say, 12, the character's not going to see anything. So the idea is the DC check is a level that a player must equivalate or equal in their die roll, plus their modifiers and everything, or do better than. That's all it is. If they don't meet that DC check after modifiers, then they don't succeed, or they might succeed in various degrees. Maybe they see a little bit. They might see like a cask sitting about 10 feet away from the door versus the 30 guards that are on the other side of that cask that are shrouded in darkness. A DC check is basically just the level at which somebody is determined to succeed or fail at any given task. It works with all of the stat breakouts for strength, for wisdom, dexterity, constitution, etc., and all of those sub-skills like athletics or acrobatics or stealth or what have you. A DC check is simply a skill check against a die roll or a number that the DM has in their head. A saving throw is the next term that we want to use. A saving throw is basically a D20 roll, surprise, surprise, plus some modifiers that are determined on the sheet of a specific stat range. My character that I'm playing in my Descent into Avernus campaign, which my friend Jocelyn is so lovingly DMing for us, has to have their enemies make wisdom saving throws for Toll of the Dead, which means that they have to beat a 13 on a D20 die roll, plus their modifiers, so they have to reach 13 or higher to succeed and take no damage, or if they have not taken any damage, if they fail, if they roll say a 10 and have no modifiers or whatever, they don't beat that 13. They have to take damage. How much damage is dependent entirely on what I roll as a character. So if they have taken damage, by the way, Toll of the Dead is fantastic. The Grave Domain for a cleric is lovely. Toll of the Dead is a fantastic spell that if they fail their wisdom saving throw, they take 1d8 damage if they haven't been damaged already, or 1d12 damage at earlier ranks, such as 1 through, I believe, 6. From there, it's added up. You have, at level 7 and higher, you have different varying levels of damage that the enemy takes. But regardless, I'm getting too far down a rabbit hole. Wisdom saving throws, or saving throws in general, rather, are that stat of the enemy or of you rolling against that DC, that die check, that is in place for a success or failure. How do you want to do this? How do you want to do this? It's probably some of the most beautiful words ever spoken by a DM, almost always uttered when a player gets a kill. This is something that I've heard from several DMs that I've been in consortium with, and I recommend you use it as well, because when you're swinging, you're just, as a player, when you're bludgeoning or when you're slashing or you're stabbing or you're casting spells left and right, the thing that you're always going for is that kill. You're constantly pushing for, I want that kill, 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 unblock my path from the rest of the story, give me this kill. And the words, all right, how do you want to do this? Gives the player all of the freedom within the confines of their character and the attack that they used to do so. All of the creativity and opportunity to describe how they want to kill that character or that enemy. If they don't want to do that, that's fine. That gives you the opportunity. All right, you were smashing this guy in the skull with a mace. You drop it down to the ground, and as you're going in for your next swing, you bring it up and you lodge some stones into the crevices of the wood, and you bring it up and you land it into a guy's shoulder and just lop into his torso, just driving deeper, deeper, deeper into his heart with all of the strength of 30 men. Feels good. How do you want to do this? It's so great. It's such a great sentence. Use it. You'll love it. You'll fall in love with it, and you'll be using it without even realizing it. NPC. Non-playable character. It's any character that the DM is playing, not the players themselves. A character is any being in the world. That could be the enemy. That could be a character controlled by the player. That could be an NPC in a shop, like a tavern keeper or a store owner or something like that. NPC is just a non-playable character for the players. Player character is the character specifically played by one of your players. Would be the party that you're used to hearing the term of. Milestone and experience for leveling up is an important distinction to make early on in your DMing. You want to choose if you want to be somebody that says, okay, well, you've done this thing, now we're going to be moving on into a difficult area, level up. Or do you want to say, well, that enemy was, 100 XP. That enemy was 400 XP. That enemy was 1,000 XP. And then you have milestones. And Wizards of the Coast actually has specific milestones for levels that you need to consider as well if you want to go down that path. I personally am a milestone leveler. I like to have my players level up when I think they've done something important, because you have more control over kind of rating what the ease of play is going to be moving forward, regardless of whether you're pre-baking it with Rime of the Frost Maiden or Descent into Avernus, or maybe you're just homebrewing. You have a lot of control over when the player gets to level up and enjoy it, rather than depending entirely on experience. Plus, tracking those numbers gets to be a pain in the butt really quickly. The final term that I think you need to know is modifiers, because this is going to be one that your players have to get familiar with as well. On your character sheet, you're going to find that, or on the character sheet for the players, you're going to find that there are the stats like dexterity, wisdom, strength, constitution, intelligence, so on and so forth. They're going to have subcategories off to the side for your perceptions, your investigations, your history checks, your arcana checks, etc. But you're also going to have 2 numbers for each of those stats, probably 3 actually. You're going to have your base stat, and then your modifier, and then you'll have a proficiency modifier, which is usually to start a +2. Your base stat determines what your modifier is. And so if you look at your sheet and they're all 10s, you're not going to have any modifiers. 10 is the average mark, 1 is the low mark, 20 is the high mark. Nobody should be starting with straight 20s. That's an anomaly. I doubt that's ever going to happen to you, but yeah, play it by ear. For every 2 points above 10 that a base stat is, that adds 1 modifier. So if I have 10, or if I have a strength of 10 or 11, it's just a straight, no additional thing to my hit die. Not going to modify the hit die at all. But if I have 12 as my strength stat or my intelligence stat, now I'm going to have a +1 modifier, which means that when I roll my d20 or roll a die, it adds plus my modifier to that base roll. And if I have proficiency, say I have proficiency with a bow staff or a quarterstaff, and I'm swinging with it, I may have proficiency with martial weapons, which are martial arts based weapons, simple kinds of things like that. That adds an additional plus my proficiency modifier, which is in another block on that character sheet. As the DM, you should be familiarizing yourself with the player character sheet. It is important that you understand the breakdown of it. I keep a copy of it in my DM screen so that I don't forget everything, and if I do, I have a quick reference. That's pretty much it, though. I think that covers most of it. If you have questions, throw them in the comments. I'm happy to answer them. Hit me up on Instagram if you have any further questions that you feel like the comments aren't really answering, and we'll go from there. I think that we have a really solid basis here. I think we're going to be able to move ahead pretty quickly to start talking about more of the actual play style of Dungeons and Dragons, as well as how to read a campaign book, how to get familiar with that kind of setup in order to be able to homebrew later or just continually run those kinds of campaigns. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. And if you liked it, please throw me a like, throw me a subscription if you want. Bell icon gives you notifications. Turn that off if you don't want them. I totally understand, honestly. Thanks for watching, and until next time, have a good one.